Welcome to Gen Con 50.
We made it.
I'm Peter Atkinson, and I want to welcome you also to our series of panels, our retrospective panels. We curated about 17, I think at last count, panels covering the history of tabletop gaming. And it was a wonderful excuse to invite many old friends to be, in many cases, had not been guests of the show, maybe ever, and say, let's fix that problem. And by having some panels really for you. So we set out to do that, and this is, I hope that you are enjoying them. How many have been to any of the other retrospective panels? Oh, good, good. Well, we just had a great one on the Ancient Sisterhood. Lisa Stevens and Adrienne did a great job, and Nicole and Beverly and Jenny. Anyway, so this panel is called Invasion of the Meeples. Not to slight, let's see, wargaming chits and miniatures and everything else, but you know, we're just trying to be clever, I guess. We want to talk about board games and the history of board games to the extent we can tie it to Gen Con, great, but don't, you know, good stories are better than a mediocre story about Gen Con. So let's, and what I want to do is kind of start with really brief introductions, and then we're going to, you know, then we're going to come back and really explore the careers of these gentlemen who have played pivotal roles in the development of board games, and that includes board war games, over the history of the last 50, whatever, plus or minus years. So introduction, start with you, Larry.
Oh, Larry? Okay. Larry Roznai, I'm president of Mayfair Games.
Yay. We'll do applause at the end.
No applause. It's all good.
Marc Miller from the Legendary Game Designers Workshop. I've decided to put legendary in front of Game Designers Workshop.
Sounds good.
It's been dead for 20 years. So.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike Gray from Milton Bradley, TSR, Milton Bradley, Hasbro.
Retired.
Retired.
I'm Chris Petersen, the founder of Fantasy Flight Games and current CEO of Asmodee North America. Not retired.
He's young.
Hi, I'm Eric Lang. I was a freelancer for 20 years. Worked with Hasbro, Fantasy Flight, WizKids, and currently the director of game design for CMON.
There we go. Thank you all for coming. By the way, gentlemen, these mics are really good, so just talk normally. Don't worry about where the mic's at. It'll pick you up. Is that correct, Mark?
It will.
Yep. So they're good mics. So
Yours out there?
it is good to try not to bang the table right by the mic. But other than that, we're good. Okay, so let's really. I want to start with Marc Miller, but what I'm kind of going to do is just march us through time. And Marc Miller has been with the industry. Mark's very famous, if you didn't know, for a traveler. But I reached out to Mark and said, hey, Mark, what do you think about the idea of a panel where you talked about board games, war games? Because you may not know, but Mark's done a lot of important work in this field as well. So,
I appreciate hearing that from you, Peter.
Yeah.
So my Gen Con story is that I wandered up to Gen Con. I like to say it was 74, but it was probably 75. And I met this icon of the industry, Lou Zocchi. You know, now he did Luftwaffe, he did Battle of Britain. He's famous. We all knew who he was. And he cornered me and talked to me because he knew I was a new game designer. And he told me how to run my business, because it's important to make your business be profitable and do the right things. And I listened attentively because I was in awe of this guy.
Yeah.
You know? And I saw him the next year at Gen Con, and he apologized to me. Because in the interim, SPI had published sales numbers for all the companies in the business. And he discovered my company was twice as big as his was. You know, I had to write a bio for this, and I really thought through, everybody lists the games they've done and where they've worked and all that, and I thought of the fun things that happened in board gaming. And, you know, gaming, Gen Con, the whole industry, it's huge, but it's still fun. But back then, We bought John Hill's Conflict Game Company. We went over to kind of finalize the deal, and we went in his basement. He had a sand table, you know, miniatures and all that sort of stuff, a rifle in the corner to, you know, a soldier would hold it like this, you know. And he was designing Squad Leader. And John was not the best of graphics guys. He just pulled out a counter from Verdun, and it had numbers on the bottom. He said, "This will be an infantryman." And those numbers transformed into what Squad Leader was.
Yeah.
We packed up in our car and drove to New York City for a game night at SPI. And it set the tone for what we did for the next 20 years, because Frank Chadwick and Rich Banner and myself and Lauren Wiseman, we all loaded into the car and we drove to New York City. We drove all night. We got there, and they just opened the doors and welcomed us in. We wandered around their offices, you know, and peeked in corners and closets. And I play tested Star Force Alpha Centauri, you know. I slept in Jim Dunnigan's office because we didn't get a hotel. Who could afford that? And this is an Origins memory, not rather than a Gen Con memory, but
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank
We
you.
love Origins. We love Origins.
so we showed up at Origins, and his henchmen, Jim Dunnigan's henchmen, were cornering everybody who used hex sheets. Because the tradition was to just buy SPI's hex sheets and use those. And they were giving us a hard time, and we're running to tell Jim that somebody had used their hex sheets. And he just, in a very magnanimous way, said, you know, the hobby and the industry are both better if people can use hex sheets rather than making some fuss. And that set the tone, that game companies are unique, not like washing machine companies or car companies who hate each other. I think we all talked to each other, we had a good time with each other, we shared ideas, we copied other people's games, and it took us to where we are today.
So give us some context. There might be somebody in the audience that doesn't know what SPI was.
SPI, Simulations Publications Incorporated, with offices in some office building in Manhattan. They ran a subscription service for Strategy and Tactics magazine every other month with a game with die-cut counters in it, with a circulation of about 30,000. I mean, Wargames have not gotten back to that in a long time.
Yeah.
And Jim Dunnigan was the president.
And this was in the 70s, right?
Early 70s.
Early 70s.
73, 74, 75.
And how did you get there? How did you end up at SPI?
Well, we just visited. I mean, they had a game night.
Yeah.
And it was mostly for people in New York City to come in and
Yeah.
play test their games all night.
Right.
And we just decided we'd go too.
So now take us from that to you ended up starting Game Designers.
Well, we'd already started Game Designers Workshop.
Okay, there.
We started that in 73. And we started as designing games for the university to put in classrooms. Lauren Wiseman did one on the Salem witch trials. I did one on the Chaco War. Frank and Rich did one on the presidential nominating convention of 1896. You know, and they were all terrible, you know. We were just learning our craft.
Yeah.
But we turned into a war game publisher. SPI had said that they wanted to take Avalon Hill's Stalingrad, which is a one-map Russian front game, and make it 4 maps. And so they were delaying, they weren't doing it, and we wanted to do it. So Frank and Rich had designed that division-level Russian front game, and we published that for $15. 4 maps, 1,600 counters. It's
That was
crazy.
Dragna Kolstein, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And so you have to think, we established a reputation in Game Designers Workshop early because our first game was a huge monster game of the Russian front. And our second one was a vector movement space combat game. And our third one was an Ancients game about the loss of the Eagles by the Roman legions to the Germans in AD 7.
Yeah.
You know, so we wanted an eclectic catalog, and we certainly had it. At one point, though, Frank made a decree as president. He said, we're never going to publish another game set before 1900. They don't sell. We best put our resources into something that will sell.
Yeah.
And so we did that. And then he did A House Divided. So American Civil War, 1865. I'm pre-Meeples.
Yeah.
None of us knew how to
Well, we
do
got to
anything.
get up to the invasion, you know, we got to set the context.
You know, we didn't do, everything was die-cut counters. We were happy to have die-cut counters.
Yeah.
We were happy to occasionally have a mounted map board. But those 70s, those years were pre-Meeples. I don't think I ever did a game that had Meeples in it.
Yeah. Well, you know, this was a marketing spin on a panel, you know, to the Meeples.
Yeah. Well, you have to have somebody to set the stage, you know, and that was us before Meeples.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good, good.
Thank you for having us, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mike Gray, you were getting into games not too long after this, right? 1978, is that
Yep.
about right?
Yep.
Yeah, so tell us how, I mean, you know, we all think of Milton Bradley as like, wow. I mean, we grew up, even if you weren't a war gamer, okay, I grew up certainly with SPI, Avalon Hill, JDW, but all of us grew up
Right.
with Milton Bradley games.
Well, I started with Avalon Hill back in when I was like 10 years old or something. And my mom bought me D-Day, which I many times set up, but never ever played all the way through to the end because it's just so much fun to set up. It's just a big line of French and Germans, you know. So it's great. But I submitted a game design to Avalon Hill back when I was 11, and got a, you know, it was on notebook paper with pencil. And I got a really nice letter from a real businessman, you know, saying, we'll keep your idea on file. It still would be a terrific game. Anyway, I could talk forever, but that was kind of nice to get a rejection letter from someone when I was 11. But I worked at the Minneapolis Star and Tribune and was in advertising and then data processing. But while I was there, I wrote some articles at Christmas time on new games, like, you know, around Christmas time, just a sort of a survey of 10 or 15 new games that were out, and that was like on the front page of the leisure section in November, and stuff like that. There's some other things that basically I was involved in. I got in a Minneapolis magazine, Play It Again, Mike, and some other things. And one of my coworkers saw an ad for a game designer, and the company wasn't specified. So I saw this, and I wrote an article, or big paragraphs, just saying how much I love games, because I played games all my life. And then I got a call back from a headhunter, and they flew me out to Springfield, Massachusetts, landed in Hartford, and I interviewed there for a game as a computer game designer. This was, you know, back in '77, and Milton Bradley was getting into things like Vectrex. They bought this system, and they had a computer game thing. They wanted that, and I was from data processing, so they figured I knew something about computers at the time. And I went in and interviewed, and the guy who I was interviewed with wasn't really a nice guy. He had to go on a trip, and it's like, oh, you, and he was kind of rude. But I sat with all the board game guys for lunch because they had to sort of entertain me till I could get on my plane. And they really liked me, and a few months later I got a call to go back. And this is, I don't know how relevant this is, but anyway, I came back in. They wanted me to design some games. I designed 8 games with rules and showed it to them, and I interviewed with everybody, and they hired me that day.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool.
This is 1978.
It's 78.
Yeah.
So to talk about the Meeples and about going from chits, I was a gamer. I played all the SPI games. I went to the game stores like at least once a month to see what was new from SPI. And but what I feel like, and I went to Milton Bradley. I put SPI maps on the wall behind in my office, just giant maps of like Soviet Union and stuff like that. And everybody came in and said, well, you know, what is all this stuff? Because at the time, Milton Bradley was doing games where you like roll a marble in a hole and hope it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
Really, that was the kind of stuff we did back in the 70s. I mean, there were, you know.
Yeah.
So, and there were two guys who were like bald and in their 50s who were designing games. And one guy was retiring, so I took his place. But what I did over time was try to integrate thoughtful play, you know, games that had more texture, more things to think about, whether it was, you know, Bargain Hunter about, you know, furnishing an apartment, my Lord of the Rings games, you know, and later, I mean, in my career, I did Mall Madness and Dream Phone and Omega Virus, which basically took electronics and melded them in with board games.
Dark Tower.
But Dark Tower, I worked on the rules of Dark Tower, which won an award. That's another whole long story, but you probably want to hear that now. But what we tried to do is what I tried to do in the games I designed, when I went to TSR in 81, I was their 110th employee. I had 36 games at Toys R Us on the shelf. So that's kind of cool. I mean, a lot of licensed games and stuff, Lord of the Rings and cartoons and Marvel and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, I did a lot of those games, and tried to put more texture, more thoughtful play into them. And then I went to TSR during the era where they sort of rose and were starting to fall. I didn't get fired. I left between the second and third purge. My best friend Jim Ward, who I talk to every 2 days, I met him there. I met a lot of other good friends like Dave Conant and a lot of people here. What I went back to was they had hired Ned Horn, who was with Eon Products and did Cosmic Encounter, and he was only there for a short time. And then Larry Harris, who did Axis and Allies. Now Larry brought, it's really important that you know this in the history, it's real important, that Larry Harris got that job, which was my spot, and he brought Axis and Allies, which Nova Games was doing, and Conquest of the Empire, and Broadsides and Boarding Parties. And what his vision was that, and he deserves a lot of credit for the Meeple thing, I think, that he took his flat games and at Milton Bradley was able to talk people into doing dimensional versions. And basically he went from the 2 points of attack factor and 1 point of defense factor, and you can move 3 spaces, which is a little chit. And he basically created a little infantryman, and it was like, this is what you need to roll to get a hit, and here's how far they move, and it was on another card. So it made things look more like sort of the H.G. Wells vision of, you know, all the soldiers on the table and all that. So we kind of brought things into 3 dimensions, and it's sort of, I think it sparked the imagination of a lot of people to do things, you know, in a more dimensional way. So that was, you know, that was pretty cool. The electronics thing, I think, was important when we brought electronics into gameplay with, again, Mall Madness, Dream Phone, and Omega Virus. I always tried to do things that you couldn't do with just a deck of cards. Some of the other electronic games, it was like, instead of flipping a card, like the thing would say, you get to move 3. But in our games, it was like I had a deck that the thing went through, so everybody got an even amount of 12s and 1s and 7s, so it was balanced. And we also snuck in stuff where if you were losing, the game helped you, and we could hinder the other players. I mean, so, you know, we tried to get that going. I don't want to monopolize things. I really,
Well, we
'cause
got an
have a
hour
lot
and a
of
half.
people
This
to
is
talk
great,
about,
Mike. This is good.
But so the thing about Meeples, and then I interviewed when I left TSR, and I interviewed different places. I went to Coleco. I was going to take a job at Coleco doing ColecoVision and television games. There were a lot of guys there from Avalon Hill. Paul Jacquez and Arnold Hendricks and other people were there. I met Bruce Shelley somewhere, and then I eventually ran into Alan Moon. And Alan Moon, again, for me, is a real important guy. I saw him this morning. I started going to some of his gameplay sessions, The Gathering, and they had a lot of them in Springfield near Milton Bradley, and I gave tours and stuff. But I think like Alan Moon and deserves a lot of credit of sort of bringing European games, and there were a number of people that did reviews and sort of brought the German games to England, and then Alan would read their little magazines, and then Brian, I can't remember his last name. What? Brian. Yeah, Brian Walker. And Brian Walker would do reviews. He was a character. But we started playing games like Shaco and Co. We started playing Wolfgang Kramer's Wildlife Adventure. And, you know, and I went to Essen way back when Alf Auchs won Spiel des Jahres and met Wolfgang Kramer, and he didn't speak English, and I talked to him, and now I have dinner with him every Thursday night in Essen. You know, and it's just cool. I don't know, the people that I've met and are influenced. I don't know. I mean,
so speaking of
it's
which,
like I hired Tracy Hickman, for example, when I was at TSR. That's one of my life's great accomplishments, because I mean, he was a guy. I noticed his talent. I read his submission, and I thought this guy's really great, and brought him into TSR. Yeah. And I met them earlier today, and they were telling other people that TSR was going to hire Ron Goulart or someone else to write the Dragonlance Chronicles, but I tried to convince everybody that I thought Tracy could do it. Margaret was a terrific writer. Tracy just had a mind that was amazing. He could write. He would sit in his office and write music that elves would, you know, maybe have or play or whatever, and then he had all these great ideas, and I thought he was just really creative. So they, you know, that's really cool. You know, guys like Rob Davio, who now you guys all know. I mean, I hired him when I was at Milton Bradley. So, you know, it's really cool. My career's over, but I'm really grateful for all the things I've been able to do and the people I met. I remember meeting you for the first time at a Gen Con. You were back behind us, and we were playing music loud, and you hated that. And,
I don't remember that.
But then,
I believe you.
I hated it.
So Mark, you were at GDW at this time for quite a few years, right? How long were you at GDW?
We started the company in 1973, and it lasted until '96.
Okay, so you were at GDW throughout this entire period that Mike. Yeah. So did you two ever meet?
I don't know that we probably met at a convention in passing. We didn't do any business, but we knew each other's names.
Oh, yeah. I came up, I mean, Traveler. Oh, God, I love science fiction. I still love all science fiction games. I read science fiction all the time. I'm into audiobooks now instead of real reading. Yeah. I don't know why. It's like listening to a play. I love Audible, so I'm a big fan of Audible. But yeah, I came up to you and I went, wow, the guy who invented Traveler. I was just in awe. I think that, I just, you know, as a life lesson, if you meet people and you know, or you don't know who they are, but you have an opportunity to meet them and you know what they've done. And I loved what you did. I mean, it's just a wonderful game. You know, it was so enabling to not have to be an orc or you know, whatever, or a barbarian, but I could be, you know, a spaceman. I mean, it's, so you just, I don't know, it's just, if you can actually like know something about what somebody does and honor them for it, it's really important. I mean, I was just sitting up here, and one of my friends from one of the inventors that I used to look at his games came up and said hi. Are you in the audience? I don't know, but it's so nice to not be forgotten. So
it's great to meet great people. Yeah. I mean, this is my excuse to, you know, hang out and ask you guys questions. So I totally okay, great. So let's come back.
Enough.
So no. It's good. By the way, Mark, I thank you. I believe you loaned us the first Traveler 1.
I was just a brief story. I was down there. John Petersen was giving a tour, and I distracted him because I wanted to hear what he had to say.
Right.
Because I've got the very first copy of Traveler up there.
It's in the Gen Con 50 Museum. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. Lucas Oil Stadium right now, all day, all night.
And then there's the wood grain box set.
Yes.
Of D&D on the second shelf. I was kind of proud that mine was on the first shelf and his was on the second shelf. But I was pointing out that there's that wood grain box shelf. The format was established by TSR, you know, by Gary. It's this box with 3 6x9 booklets. And you look at Traveler up there, it's the same size box because that's the format. It's 3 booklets, the same size.
Right.
I can remember writing that game
Yeah.
with my wood grain box over here of D&D. And, well, what do? Well, you need to generate characters. So the first book, I started typing about how to generate characters. It was different, but he set the tone. He set the standard on what this game was going to look like.
Right.
And that was fun.
All right. Great. Well, okay. So we're caught up to we're well into the late '80s now, and Christian, you are very well known for Fantasy Flight and Asmodee, but I don't think that's where you started.
Nope.
So take us to Denmark.
All right. So I actually grew up in Denmark, in Europe, and grew up, had the great fortune to have a dad that was a gamer. He loved games. He would play probably Marc's games with his brother, but he came to Denmark with his wife, my mother, and there wasn't a whole lot of games over there, so we would go for Christmas to my grandparents' place for like 2 weeks. It was a lot of it, and he was getting bored. He was really bored. So one day he went upstairs to the upstairs attic, and he got like a 2x2 table, and he missed this game called Tactics 2. And so he tried to recreate Tactics 2 using grids and stuff. And
this is when original
I
Avalon
was
game.
10. I mean, it was a very old, one of the original war games period.
Yeah.
And I was 10, but I was the closest thing to a gamer in the house. And so I had to sit down. He didn't really remember the rules, but he says, "This is fun." And just pretend to.
Oh man, trying to play that.
That's what I remember. That you know, he just used like magic barker or something to make woods, and then that was sort of my first like, wow, this is a game. What the hell? You know, it's a pretty cool looking. He used like coins and whatever. So that's kind of where it started. I played a lot of games with him, but I think the first thing I really ignited personally was 3 or 4 Christmases later when my grandparents, who are American, sent me for Christmas, a big package full of D&D. And I think I'm the first person in all of Denmark to have D&D. I'm not entirely sure, but this was like in '83 or something like that. And so that was amazing, and I would introduce all these players to D&D, but then just magical thing happened a couple of years later. We found a store in Copenhagen that sold games, so it was like Mecca. I mean, I'm still today, I love hobby gaming stores, and this was my first hobby game store. And I will forever be thankful for it being there, and it's in my heart. My dad went there the first time. He was also blown away. He bought Hitler's War from Avalon Hill. We went back and played that, and I got older and more mature and kind of understood those things. But I would go back to that store. I would get in the train by myself and go to the store, just look around. I started getting into Games Workshop. And one morning, I was waiting for the store to open because I wanted to get in there, and they were redoing the store, so they put me to work in the store. And I actually did all the pegs for the miniatures, and they gave me like, I could choose 3 blisters for free for my work. So I was really proud of that. I got like little rats and stuff for my D&D game, I think, at the time. So games is a really important part of my, I guess, childhood and young adulthood, and we would be very inspired by the Mike's Game Master line. That was something that really, you know, I was from the Chit era, which was great, but it was kind of harder to get people involved. But when they saw the little soldiers, you know, they can kind of relate to that. I played with those little soldiers. There wasn't a game involved with them, but I had little. Do you remember the little bags of soldiers you would get? They kind of relate, and so we can get a lot of people into that. And so in high school, I started a game convention called the Games Weekend, which was very successful. It was like 300 people, and it was just for Denmark. It was a lot in 1988 or something, and I thought that was really cool. And I thought maybe I could make a business here because we had a food stand. And we sold hot dogs and soda and stuff like that, but 300 people, the only place I could get food, period. So we made a lot of money on this food. I mean, a lot of money, I probably made $500 or something on the food. I was like, wow! And I had fun and I made money. This is maybe there's something there. And a couple of years later, I decided I was kind of a little bit entrepreneurial, so I actually wrote a letter to Avalon Hill, and I said, I love your stuff. Not enough people here are doing things with it. I would like to be an importer of Avalon Hill product. And there was a wonderful lady there called Phyllis Apolko, who worked there. Phyllis back in '88, and she was our sales rep for Avalon Hill, and we started flying, actually boating in Avalon Hill product, which we would sell wholesale to bookstores and move around. And
So how old were you when you started this company? Approximately.
What was I? I was 89, so I was probably 16.
Yeah. Okay. That's what 16. You started a
somewhere around there,
distributor.
so I remember.
You started importing Avalon Hill products
that's
and
right.
being a distributor.
And
in
that's right.
Denmark.
We also started getting some Cassian stuff because Kirk Stafford, who I just wrote back and forth, because I remember there was no email. It was more or less letters, and when I could get to my dad's work, I could use a fax machine. That was international communication at the time. So I started that Avalon Hill business, and then this awful thing called college started creeping up and ruining my games weekends and my little import company. So I actually, one of my friends was helping me, so I left it was called Pegasus Spill Import, which means Pegasus Games Import. And so I left it with him, and I went to my first year of college. This was in Minnesota, a small college called St. Olaf.
I went to Carleton.
You went to Carleton? Well, see, this is really interesting. We should talk about that because
Yeah, we should.
first of all, Carleton sucks. You know, there are two
Only in
schools.
football.
There we go.
There are two schools in Northfield, Minnesota. Two hills. There's Carleton on one side, and there's St. Olaf on the other side, and they're kind of rivals. So
Yeah.
at least in my age, they were rivals.
You had a good choir.
Yes, we could sing. But what's actually interesting,
We had a go club.
Okay, am I gonna have to break this up?
Security.
take it
Okay,
outside
so this
later.
is the break in your career. You're gonna come back. Now you've moved to America, and you're gonna start a game company here soon.
I was going to go to college. Yeah, but there's one anecdote that's really interesting about Northfield. Is that from St. Olaf?
It's important.
It's important actually.
Yeah, okay.
Because in that little town,
Yeah.
over a couple of years before I graduated, we graduated John Nephew
Yes.
of Atlas Games.
Yep.
We graduated Lisa Stevens,
Yep.
who worked with Peter for many, many years.
Yeah, it was just on my
And we
last panel.
graduated Jonathan Tweet,
Yeah.
who is an accomplished writer for role playing, and there's one I forget.
Oh, Greg Gordon of West End Games.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway,
And me.
somehow, if you want to get into the games industry, you have to go to Northfield and drink the water. I think.
Guess so.
This is something there. But I didn't know at the time. So anyway, so went to college, and after college, I decided to start another company in the U.S. But the fun story about leaving my import company is I left with my friend.
Yeah.
Is that about 8 months into my first year of college, my parents were calling because the person from the government that collects your house if you don't pay money.
Yeah.
So he had completely neglected to file VAT, and they decided to assess the company for some crazy amount of money, and my parents' house was the address because the basement was our warehouse, and so we got that solved, but.
Yeah.
That was a lesson of friends and business.
And parents.
My parents were pretty cool, but they're sort of concerned that they didn't want to collect. At the time, I think it was like $50,000 when our actual bill was probably $2,000 or something. And
Right.
anyway, so that's it.
So I think we're up to the 90s now, well into the 90s, and we're just setting the stage for what was the board. We're hearing tales of what board games were like back in those days, mostly board war games and Avalon Hill, SPI types of games. At what point did things really start to change in the American market? Here we have. I want to give Larry a chance to jump in here.
Gee, all right, great.
Yeah. Let's get us up into the 90s. How did you get into this?
So I spent an entire, I think it was my junior year of high school, moving wood pieces around a risk board. We played every single day. It took us about 2 days to finish a game, and went on. This is after doing Hoopla and all the drop the marble thing and everything else.
Now, about what year was this now?
This was 72.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm playing,
yeah.
but I'm not into any of this other stuff. I didn't have a local game store. I was a deprived child, or depraved, I don't know which. But I did move wood pieces around the board, which of course will come to the fore a little bit later here.
Right.
Wooden pieces, meeples, what have you. And then I did the military thing, and then I did the corporate thing, and then my brother has this client that's a game company that happens to be 2 miles from my house. It's Mayfair Games, which was founded by 2 lovely brothers with very deep pockets. And God bless them for all of it. And they were coming home from a game convention one day and wanted to design a game without dice.
This would be the Bromleys?
This would be the Bromley brothers, Peter and Darwin, and of course the other 2 brothers and a few other people. Bill Fawcett was part of that group at some point in time. And they formed a game company in a Chicago neighborhood called Mayfair. And for a while they shared offices with FASA down in the South Side. But by the time I got to them, it was '89 when I went to my first playtest night. What a coincidence, right? These guys play games. You like games. They do playtest nights every week. So I showed up at Mayfair and we did playtests, and wow, I did a playtest and I got my name in the rules of a game. That was really, really, really cool. But you know, I designed a couple of games, but I'm not geniuses like these guys over here. I'm more than an entrepreneur like Chris. So I want to go to my first Gen Con. I want to play in a tournament. I've been playing this game for 6 months. I'm really good. I'm really good. And God bless Darwin. He let me off really easy. And I just told you this little story before we started. And he's like, you know, whatever you might win in the tournament, I wouldn't have a chance of winning. I'll give you for free anyway. I really need you to come over here and demo this game for me. And it was Eurorails, the railroad games with no dice, which I really loved. And my name was in the rules, so that was cool. My badge said Debbie. It was great. So this is 1990. My first Gen Con. And so I'm hanging around with these guys, and we're hanging around with these guys, and they go to Essen, I guess it would have been late 94 or 95. I think it was late 94 they went to Essen, and they met up with this gentleman by the name of Klaus Teuber. And he had this little game called Settlers of Catan. And for some reason that only God knows, they were able to get a direct license with the author, which is extremely important in this particular case. Because we were the only company, other than the German company that brought it to market, that had a unique license for Catan. And they brought over some copies initially for one show or another, and it sold pretty good. And I was at the Gen Con, it would have had to have been 95. We had 1,000 copies of Catan in German with English language on copy paper. And by Saturday, they were just gone. And so, again,
what year did you say this was?
This would have been 95.
95.
This would have been 95, because they published late in 95 their first brown box.
Yeah.
But again, what is Catan full of? Wooden pieces. It's tactile. It's three-dimensional. And oh, by the way, the board rearranges itself every time you play.
Yeah. Oh, and it has a meeple.
And it has, well, it has the robber meeple moving around. You betcha. It has a meeple, right?
Finally.
Right. Finally we get to a meeple. Yeah. That's really something closer to a meeple than square cubes that Risk had. But of course, my Risk set is that old, it had wood pieces. So again, the wood pieces become pertinent again. And I've always said when people ask me about this, whether or not it's the first one that blew the world up. And from 94, 95 till we are today, well, not till today, until X happened, it became like the British invasion of music. Okay, all these wonderful folks over there in Europe were designing worker placement.
See, now we got Meeple and Invasion. Good.
Yes, Meeple and Invasion. There you go. It's
a
war game. It's a war game.
Good.
and it was new to us who had by that time Hasbro had started recycling stuff that maybe wasn't all that great, or this or that or whatever. And again, the marble going down, playing Hoopla, doing this, doing that. Milton Bradley wasn't Milton Bradley anymore. Parker Brothers wasn't Parker Brothers anymore. And hey, this is cool. This is new. This has got wood now instead of plastic, and you know, it's got extended rules. And oh wait, there's expansions. What the hell is that? You know, from the board game side of the world, not the war game, but the board game. It's got expansions. It's got this. It's got that. And then everything else came piling down the pipe. And then Carcassonne hit as well. Real soon after that, Mayfair published its first English version of Catan, and then went bankrupt. You think I'm joking?
No.
No. At the end of 1996, Mayfair pulled the plug. And some friends of ours from Virginia walked in along with an ex-TSR employee, between Will Niebling and Pete Fenlon and Bruce Neidlinger and those guys. Iron Crown rescued Mayfair, and then went bankrupt. No lie. There's that point in time where you can't put it out together fast enough, and the money doesn't come in fast enough from the other side before everything starts falling apart. Luckily, Catan was resilient to that, and frankly, on more than one occasion, saved Mayfair. And again, Carcassonne comes out, and I can't even think of most of the games that were coming out back in the 90s because I was a little busy. And all of a sudden, Mayfair needs a president, and that's where I came in, and that's where we started talking about branding, not something a lot of people talked about. Talked about trade dress, which people talked about. Talked about the box, the bookshelf box. That's how I learned what it was called. You know, okay, all these games are going to be in the same box. We're not going to make 5 different boxes for these 5 different games. This is going to be our basic board game box, and those kinds of things. It was sort of bookshelf, but it was a little bigger because of all the damn tiles that are in the game. And on some level, that's the way this board game thing happened. I mean, Gen Con was dying until Peter came in with Magic, but the board game section was dying until Mayfair came in with Catan and everybody else that followed and did all their crazy work and so on and so forth. I mean, my first Gen Con in 1990, we were one exhibit hall in the Mecca. I don't go back farther than that, but that was awful damn small. It's smaller than Hall A in this place. Yeah. And one side was role-playing, and the other side was board games. And then the convention spaces started going away, and we were put in basements of arenas and this and that with our games and so on. But it was those two things, the collectible cards and the board game resurgence, the Euro invasion, that brought life back to this industry that on some level was floundering at that point. The war gamers were getting older, new guys weren't coming in, right? There was no interest in anything. And then finally, a lot of the American designers started tuning in on this stuff, and now we've got a game coming out every half hour between Kickstarter and, I mean, seriously.
Yeah,
I mean, how many projects
sure.
are out? I think board games is like the #2 category on Kickstarter after movies, or something like that. Yeah. And so, that was pretty much the 90s for me, and I took over in 99, and everything started just blowing up and going crazy.
So Eric.
Hi.
Yeah, I was pretty intimidated too.
Welcome to the Invasion of the Meeples panel.
I'm like the little kid at the Hall of Legends table here.
Oh, Jesus.
So I think your career, professional, starts closer to the year 2000, but that means you had to have been witness to this.
Absolutely. I grew up playing every single, at least one game from every single one of these guys.
So as somebody who wasn't yet professionally involved, if I got my facts correct, in the 90s, looking back, what did this look like? Give us some perspective as somebody who was a fan at that time, because you talked about. I'm glad you called it the British invasion or the German invasion, maybe
the Euro
in this case,
invasion.
the Euro invasion.
That's what it was.
I was a little busy at the time too.
Yeah, no kidding.
Trying to figure out how to sell Magic cards, but you've gone on to design. We'll get to that later. Many important games, board games and card games. What's your perspective on what happened then?
Well, I mean, you're exactly right. I was a fan. I've been a gamer basically my whole life. I grew up a German kid with undiagnosed ADD that just wanted to make things all the time, and I played games like Chris. I spent most of my summers in Germany playing games with my grandmother, and they were terrible, terrible games. I won't name any of them. I'll name one. There's a German game called Mensch ärgert nicht, which is really
Aggravation.
bad. That's right. That's the one that we played, and I just modified it because I put robots and dinosaurs in it, made it end. But most of my fondest memories came from that period, and then I discovered Stratego, and that blew my mind. I was instantly a gamer at that point, and then then I discovered. I became a gamer overnight. One night when one of my friends, who I just introduced him to heavy metal music, that was my passion at the time, he introduced me to D&D. Second edition, Spelljammer.
Right.
We played 1 4-hour session, and I was a gamer at the end of that. My life was completely changed. And at that point, a couple months after that, playing D&D every single weekend. Discovering games that we discovered Traveler right after that. We died in character creation. My mind was blown yet again. We discovered Fortress America. I was like, I can't believe games can be this, because we'd only played Risk before then. Actually, I was very much a latecomer to Settlers Catan. I was into Magic, in fact. Most of I played Magic from '93 until now. So I was a CCG gamer for most of that. But then I actually discovered Twilight Imperium, which was the game that Fantasy Flight was.
Which we're going to hear about in just a minute.
So
good setup, by the way. Just for
thank you.
Yeah, good.
Until that point, I'd actually not met any of these guys, but I had played something by all of them, and by the 2000s, I realized that there was nothing else I wanted to do. I wanted to be a professional game designer. That's the only thing I wanted to do, and part of why I'm here today is to dovetail to Gen Con, is that I came. Starting in '97, I came to Gen Con every year with my own game prototypes, and my goal was to meet all these legends that made the games that I grew up on. And well, spoiler alert, they shaped my career up until this point, but I'll tell more about that later.
Yeah, excellent. So, Twilight Imperium, 1997.
Yeah, so actually...
now, was this in any way a reaction to what Larry is describing?
I want to talk about that.
Go ahead.
These hex-shaped...
These hex-shaped things?
My first Gen Con, I think I want to roll Gen Con into this because I love Gen Con. It's my 22nd in a row.
Thank you.
And it's our Super Bowl. It's what we dream about until it ends, and we dream about the next one.
Yeah.
My first Gen Con, we couldn't afford anything. Actually, quick step back. I had started a company called Fantasy Flight Publishing because we've had this idea with a friend in a college that there were these wonderful European comic books like Tintin and Asterix and all these great books that were just almost devoid in the U.S. They were not here. So it's like, man, we can get the rights for those. So like I did with Avalon Hill back in the day, I write a letter to the Dargaud at that point, a French publisher. This is my first interaction with France. By the way.
Jeez.
And could I please have the rights to a series called Lucky Luke and some other series? And they said, sure. Because for them, and America for European comics was wasteland. There was nothing there, and it was a little spark of hope for them, maybe. So we got the rights, and over college, I wrote a business plan to get investment and all that stuff, and the comic books sold terrible. Terrible. They could not sell at all. I was in Comic-Con and everything, and I was lucky we sold 3 books the whole weekend, so this was not good. So I was very concerned because I was very much
that makes
felt
sense,
a debt of honor to our investors, and I told them, you know what, I really like games a lot, and we had learned to print stuff. So we had Quark Express, and we had all this stuff. So we figured out how to print. We figured out 4-color plates. We had all the stuff to make the comic books. Turns out that you can make games with that too, if you have the right printer.
Really?
And also, and very importantly, the comic book industry was so close to the game industry. There was a trade magazine called Comics and Games Retailer. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that there was a comics and gaming resource, and so in there was this is a distributor that want to buy games. There's another distributor that want to buy games. So I thought maybe that was a good thing to get into, but we didn't have a game. So being inspired by a game called Magic Realm, and my desire to have a game like the Game Master series in space. With politics like junta and all of this sort of mix of what I really wanted to play, I wanted to buy that game. So I designed Twilight Imperium with a hexagon shape. In 1996, I decided to go to, speaking of, there's actually a Bromley story I have with Darvin Bromley. So there was a local little game convention I went to, and he was there, and I was there to ask people about the industry and how to do it. And Darvin Bromley says, yeah, and I told him about my game. He said, yeah, I'll never work. Space opera never works. Don't do it. And I'm like, okay. So
he's a bit of an naysayer sometimes.
So then we I was not very encouraged. I'll tell you that. But maybe he was bitter at that time in '96.
'96, he would have been really bitter.
Yeah, he was not a happy guy anyway. But so I designed this game. I had one of my friends help me design action cards because I'm really from a design perspective, I'm more of a process designer. I want every card to be perfect. For my action card, I was like, get +1 health Well, I would probably spend 3 hours on that, just make sure that the +1 health was the most amazing health you could get. And so I was not good at that, what I call content or component design, but I designed the systems and the way it works and so on and so forth. And so I was going to go to Gen Con, actually decided to go to Gen Con as a business decision without a game, but I had my prototype in '96, so that was my first Gen Con. I couldn't afford anything, because remember, we were actually negative equity at the company, because all our comic books did not sell. So I drove down there. I couldn't afford a hotel room, but I was able to get a spot in the University of Milwaukee, where you shared dorm rooms with anybody who couldn't afford anything else. Yep. And so there was a guy who was going. Also, his name was Chris Dorn, who was helping me out. He said, "Hey, I've been to Gen Con before. I've been a little bit in the industry, so I'd meet you down there." So I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning in Minneapolis because I didn't want to pay for the hotel, and I drove down for the night. And as the dawn, appears, I drive in at 6 o'clock in the morning, or some 6:30. I drive into the awakening Milwaukee, and they're in front of the convention center, Mecca, it was called at the time.
Yep.
I had a really ugly kind of stand in my back. I had all my shit pardon me, all my stuff back in there. And so I parked illegally right in front of the convention center, but nobody was awake. Right. So this is my fondest Gen Con memory, is me opening my trunk and running in, and the convention hall, thank God, was open. It's like 6:30 in the morning. I don't know why it was open, but it was open. I run around, and everybody's set up, and there's my number, and I put my stuff in there, and then I moved my car, and the car was fine. I didn't get a fine. So that was my first experience. I'm looking around. I'm amazed by this. I feel awed by the place, but I was too busy not getting a ticket. But anyway, so I was showing this game, and I had a prototype, and I was showing it off, and I wanted to get contacts. I wanted to know artists, I wanted to know distributors. And I play a lot of people, and finally it's like another game with sheep and bricks that looks exactly like this. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just like, yeah, they're playing it up in the atrium, and it's people really like it. I'm like, oh, really?
Really?
They were comparing Twilight Imperium.
Yeah, because it had the hex board.
To sell it
hexes.
Absolutely. And so I could like, no, it's nothing to do with sheep.
Definitely
Nothing to do with sheep.
It's just the same game, with space. And so next year, I actually published in '97.
Right.
We published it. Origins was actually where we sold it first. But compared to the shows that I've been selling comic books, it was just amazing, because I would actually sell like at least 50 games.
Right.
So it was like exploded our heads, and so we published that game in '97, and for several years it was called is it like Settlers in Space? This is what people were calling it. The Magic Realm.
Don't you just hate that?
The Magic Realm was actually inspiration for the hexagons that just happened to come together. One thing you might not remember, Mark, but when I was first starting to figure out how to make it, I found your name in the Comics Game Retailer, and you actually did consulting work for me.
I did that. I remember that.
For like
and Darlene's
for
out
like a
there,
couple of months.
We both talked to you.
Yeah, and so we talked about all these things, and Mark advised me. Thank you. So I think we paid you very little, but
well, you did.
we appreciate it.
Welcome to the industry.
So that's the story of when it came out. And at the time, the reason I wanted to do it was because I loved the games, and board games. Not knowing about the sheep and the brick. Boardgames was a wasteland at the time.
It absolutely was.
Avalon Hill had just sold himself to Avalon Hill.
That came
doing
a little
nothing.
later.
The last game they did was called Monsters Menace America, and it was the only game that was really available, even in the game stores. The rest was some classics and here and there, but there was really almost no activity from Avalon Hill.
Hasbro bought them. I can talk about that.
Then Hasbro bought them a little bit later. So that's when Twilight Imperium came out. And I started a little struggling game company, but then the industry started to really shake up. You were flying high.
Yeah.
More of us American companies were going to Essen. I remember you and I shipped together in my first Essen. That would have been 1999.
99?
Yeah, Will called me up and said, I got this guy, Chris Petersen, he wants to get something over to Essen. Can we work something together? So
that's how it got there.
That's how it got there.
So, Mike, at the Milton Bradley, and so you're Milton Bradley. I mean, you're selling to Walmart, Target, and Toys R Us. Were you aware that in the tabletop? But you have always, of course, been a hobby gamer, a tabletop gamer.
Right.
So you must have also seen, even though your business was over here, you must have also seen this wasteland of board gaming but then the change of that, because I also know you were a Magic fan, as
Right.
you well know.
Yep.
you must have also seen this influx of Euro style games that started happening in the late '90s. What were the types of conversations you were having about that within Hasbro?
Back in the '90s, you know, I came to Gen Con. Well, let me just start before I forget this. My first Gen Con in '81, they at TSR decided that they wanted to have a musical group at the front door singing songs about our new role-playing game introductions. So I actually was in a white tuxedo with a guitar singing in Uncle Duke and the Dragons.
You were Duke, right?
And we sang, you know, songs like Star Frontiers, the game of outer space.
You should have got to St. Olaf.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. But anyway, so I was in a white tuxedo singing at the front door in my first Gen Con.
And they still came in?
But at Hasbro, yeah, I know. At Hasbro, we had line reviews, and I had come to the first time Magic was introduced, and I traded. What did I trade? I traded Omega Virus games for Magic boxes of Magic cards, of Alpha Magic cards. So I had a bunch of those, and we played, you know, but we didn't really understand that much about deck building. But anyway, so we played with like all the colors in our deck, and nothing ever happened. And but we figured it out eventually. But it was funny because Jim Ward and I would play, and it was like, we don't get this. It's like we never get anything. I mean, I need red mana, and there's only 3 of them in my deck, you know, because we played with starter decks and stuff. You know, just, you know,
Yeah.
Anyway. But we had a line review, and I came back from Gen Con and raised my hand. I was just a, you know, game designer. And I said, there's a game that's really going to be big. It's called Magic the Gathering, and you know, and it was like, well, okay, thank you. You went to Gen Con, and it has orcs and dragons in it. Great. Well, in December, they sold their millionth booster pack of Magic cards, and I raised my hand in December and said, I told you guys about this in the summer, but if I told you that in the hobby business, out of little hobby shops, there's a product that has sold 1 million units, and like, you know, their ears perked up. You know, it's called Magic the Gathering, and you know, and they were all amazed. Nobody knew about it. And of course, the rest is history. Later on, they ended up buying Wizards. And I was really into it. I applied for a job as vice president of Magic way back when. That was in the '90s. But so first of all, they started to be aware of it. The next thing is Hasbro had an interactive division that did, you know, computer game versions of a lot of our games. Well, there's not a lot you can do with a computer that you can't do with a board game, and I think some of the board games are better than the computer versions. It's because they're there, they're tactile, you can touch them as opposed to just hitting buttons. So they were looking for a way to bring more depth or to have something more strategic. So I actually, we talked to Microprose, and Microprose had bought Avalon Hill, I believe, and at the time,
That civilization.
And Trefoil, they bought Francis.
oh yeah,
company.
they had. That's right, they had that too. And we went to. I was with another guy. We went down to Microprose, and we ended up. Hasbro Interactive ended up buying Microprose in order to add a military, strategic, sort of historical component to the Hasbro games. You know, instead of doing, you know, Connect 4 and all that. And so that was real interesting. And when Avalon Hill was part of that purchase, I said, you know, we could do something with this. So we ended up doing the Avalon Hill business it was just 2 years. We did 10 games. I kind of ran that whole enterprise and put together our games, you know, and we did. Diplomacy was one of the Avalon Hill games that we sort of were asked, you have to do this. But then we did History of the World, and we did Acquire, we did Axis and Allies Europe, Craig Van, yep, Queen's Gambit, Craig Van Ness, great designer, and I had actually worked out a way to do collectible, tradable, molded figure game. So it was kind of like the idea of doing Magic, but with figures. I mean, HeroClix really is a better incarnation of what Craig and I came up with, that we almost sold through to Milton Bradley. But we did the Avalon Hill games, and they were very successful. And again, Larry Harris for getting us started in Game Master back in the '80s, and then what I tried to bring to Milton Bradley with the Avalon Hill games. The problem with the Avalon Hill games, and I don't know if you guys know the ones that we did in the big boxes, but all of our designers were playing those games all the time, like during the day and everything. And we might sell 30 to 60,000 of those games, whereas if you're working on something that's based, like the Mork and Mindy card game I did sold over 1.2 million copies. So it's just to have your resources of your guys working on something that's going to sell less than 100,000 units when they could be working on Pass the Trash or some marble dropping game like you say that's going to sell, and we're going to put a TV show on it or a license on it, and we'll sell 500,000 or 1 million of them. It's just not a good use of your resources, so they kind of shut it all down, and they let Wizards. I did a handover to Wizards of every game, what I thought could be improved. It was all in a binder, and Wizards ran with it for a while. But I think that's kind of an important part of getting big games. We were actually in Target and some other places eventually. It was after actually Twilight Imperium. But
The Twilight Imperium was chits. I couldn't afford the plastic. No way.
Well, let's come into the new millennium here, and come back to you, Eric. So tell us about some of your board game, some of the highlights of working on board games for you once you did get into doing this for a living.
Well, so I am quite the latecomer to board games because I came into the industry in '97 as a card game guy. I went to design collectible card games, and what inspired there's two key people that inspired me to get into board games. Those are Richard Garfield and Chris Petersen, who's right here. I had in '97. I remember I had this card game that I designed by myself. I started my own game company, which is the worst thing that somebody who only wants to design games should do. I hired all my friends, paid ourselves salary before we shipped our first products. All extremely intelligent planning, and we came to Gen Con, and with our prototype, a tarot card game called Mystic, which, now that I think about it, it played basically like a Euro game before I knew what Euro games were. It had a lot of mechanics that you see on Board Game Geek right now, like hand management and action selection and all that cool stuff. We didn't know what that was. I ran into Richard Garfield in the bathroom at Gen Con.
Oops, sorry.
I was like, oh my God, that's Richard Garfield. And of course, I said, I went up to him and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Garfield, I just want to meet you. I'm a huge fan. I have a game here at the show. I would love for you to see it." I say in the bathroom, and Richard is not. He's kind of shy, and and you said, "Sure," and his body language came off. It's like, okay. I crossed the line. I came on too strong. No problem. I told him where we were. I thought that was the end of it.
Right.
It looked like an idiot in front of my hero.
And the urinal.
In a urinal. And anyway, in any case, we went back to our table at Gen Con, and about an hour later, Richard came to our table with Jim Lynn and Scaphalias and all of his team.
Oh my God!
To sit down at our table and play.
That would scare me.
They
used to do that in my office. They would all come in. Yeah.
Well, yes, but I was too busy just being blown away. Like, oh my God, these four guys, the four guys who make the game that I grew up on, came here to play my game, and they played it, and they gave me a lot of amazing feedback. And just based on that, I learned more in that hour, I think, than I did in like the year after. And that inspired me to go on and just keep going, even though I wasn't great at running the business, to keep designing games. I had gone to many Gen Cons after that, and I'd met Chris and John Zinzer from AG, who were for the first time. That's right. I thought Todd Gell was actually.
I was doing Discourse at Essen when you.
That's right. See, he knows better than I do.
Yeah.
I ran into them at.
It's one in every crowd.
Well, it's true. I met him at Essen, and Fantasy Vet was doing Discourse, which was a collectible disc flipping miniature game. With that played a lot like a board game,
right?
And that was basically what I wanted to do. And we met year after year. We'd have a half-hour meeting, I think, about every.
The first thing you did is you were there like 3 months a year, always from January to March, and we're in Minnesota. That's not a pleasant time.
No kidding.
To be in Minnesota.
I used to work for Honeywell.
So, Eric, we originally, I met you and asked him, we said, let's work together, let's try.
Right.
And you were going to come up, and we were going to do a collectible card game based on a Reiner Knizia design.
That's right, yep.
And we couldn't make it work. In the meantime, we had gotten the Lord of the Rings board game, and we wanted to follow that up, and so a couple of guys had read this book called Game of Thrones. And so we went ahead and got the license for Game of Thrones because we thought it would be very cool. It's an awesome series of books. Nobody knew about it, really, at the time. and it would be right next to our Lord of the Rings because it was a literary property with cool depth and whatever. So we did that. But we also got the TCG rights. And as he was working on it, we decided, screw that, we're going to make a Game of Thrones TCG.
That's right. Actually, back one step, I did have the honor of being I think it was the first designer to send back a prototype to Reiner Knizia and say, "I'm sorry, we can't do this."
Wait, hold on. When did you do that?
We did it.
I remember very well the email I sent. I'm like, "Hi, Dr. Knizia, I am nobody."
Well, we ended up doing it. It was called Scarab-Lords.
Right.
So the little card game called Scarab-Lords by Reiner was originally intended to try to be collectible. But we couldn't make it work because it was simply too perfect. And with collectible games, there's something where you have to break a little bit. It has to have the flexibility of the creativity and the imagination of trying to find the optimal broken thing.
I've also sent prototypes back to Reiner Knizia, so you are not alone.
Well, at least you were running a company.
Well, yeah, sort of.
But that particular game, actually, we had to do some significant design work for it. And so as a first board game experience, I think it was Reiner flew in to Minneapolis to come look at the game that we'd done significant work on, which is probably the most intimidating experience I've ever had. I mean, that was Scarab-Lords.
The Scarab-Lords?
Yeah, when he came to look at the final game because when we wanted to make it a little bit, we wanted to add some more thematic elements to it, so I required to redesign a bunch of cards. And I mean, I was coming into the industry going like, this is Reiner Knizia, you don't touch his stuff, and anyway, it went well. Yeah, but he enjoyed what we did with it. But I remember sweating bullets for pretty much an entire hour while he sat quietly watching us play the game.
Yeah.
So that about at the same time, it's interesting. Fantasy Flight was very small, maybe about 8 people, and Eric was like an employee, even though he was a consultant. But so one year we had done really well. We had not lost money or something. I don't remember how well we did. But we took everybody to Mexico, and we brought Eric.
That's right.
And we played nonstop Reiner Knizia's Lord of the Rings Confrontation game, which people call like a Stratego game, which is a disservice. And so we played it how many times?
Tons of times.
50 times, and so that we ended up actually designing with Reiner an expansion for it together.
See, I sat with Reiner Knizia in a bar in England when he had only had 2 games out. He had Res Publica and Digging, and it was real interesting because he was thinking about quitting his day job and all that. And I talked to him, and I just said, you need to get out and do stuff. I did. I mean, it was really kind of cool to meet him early, and Wolfgang Kramer also, real early before they were doing lots of products. But so it's funny how we all evolve, over time. The people we meet, the people we affect. you see what other people do, and you kind of build on that. It's pretty neat. It's a great industry where you see now how things evolve. We talked about the chits, we talked about the Meeples. There's electronics now that came in.
Yep.
Worker placement now is the hot thing.
Yes, very. Actually, I love those games. So we've got about 20 minutes. Let's move to sort of back up from so much from our personal experiences and analyze. Board games have been around the longest of any category. They predate everything else. We have board games with us for a long time. Predate role-playing games, certainly. Predate trading card games. Board games were at the first Gen Con with historical miniatures games. But they were always, for a long time, and they had a real strong heyday with military war games in the 70s. But then, for a long time, there was, like you said, the wasteland. And then in the last, since the turn of the century, I think maybe starting in the 90s, and then an inflection point maybe around 10 years ago or so, now board games are the biggest category here at the show, I believe. Is that, I think in terms of...
Probably. I have a funny story about Peter, though. Can I tell a funny story about you?
Okay, but then we're going to come back to me, okay? yes, go ahead.
I don't know if you remember, but in year 2000, I got married, and my honeymoon, we went to Essen, of course, a spiel.
Yeah.
And my wife was there helping sell stuff in the booth, and we were one of the not very many Americans, and so Peter and, who was it, invited us out for dinner, because we were just Americans, and it was, I knew the guy that knew Peter, I don't remember his name. And we're sitting at dinner, and I was like, "It's Peter Atkinson, the magic guy. This is amazing." And I said,
but I do remember this story. Yeah.
And then Peter says, "Well, in order to really have an effective business and to be profitable, you have to have a game that people repurchase and re-engage in." And I said, "I think board games are going to be really big." He said, "No, it'll never work. There's not enough repeat purchase."
Yeah. Well, I was wrong. I'm happy to be here for you. I'm delighted that I was wrong about that and many other things. So what changed? Like what would you describe? What do you think is like the really important sort of milestones or events that cause now board games to be such a big factor after even though they've been with us a long time, for a long time kind of being the last category in the industry, to now being the strongest or one of the strongest. I mean, it's certainly not, if you throw games like the real mass market card games in there or not, but within Gen Con, within this tabletop gaming realm of board games. So Larry, you haven't talked for a while. Let's start with you and Mark and work our way back this way.
Again, I've said this before or whatever, and around 2004, Barnes & Noble approached us about Catan, and we said no, because the contracts are toxic, and we couldn't afford it. And we fought that battle for 3 years, and finally in 2007, when the deal was finally right, we said yes, because Barnes & Noble said, we're going to build this gaming section. Okay, it's brand new, we've never done this before, we're going to throw something in that is maybe a little harder to sell than a book or what have you. And so, and we found out through the clandestine organization that is this lovely industry that they weren't going to do this unless they had Catan. That was clear. Because they didn't do it for 3 years unless they had Catan. So finally we caved in. Okay, this is what it's got to be. They said okay. And then they put it in. Then Borders puts Catan in, and then Target comes knocking at the door. So at some point right there in the mid to late 2000s, the mass market did not make us go to them on bended knee. They actually knocked on our door and said, hey, we want to do this. You know, we see all this other stuff going. Catan, I think at the time, was in the 200,000 units for the base game range-ish, something of that nature. We were inching close towards that. And they finally got up and took notice. And it wasn't just Catan, because Barnes & Noble, I think, did, what, 12 feet and 6 feet high? So they had 2 games from us and a plethora of other games from other people. But that's one of the things that I point to when a company like Mayfair, which had its pitfalls and gone through this and that, ultimately lands a 20,000 unit purchase order from one customer. And then from that point on, it just started snowballing and getting crazier and crazier to the point where even though some people say it's schlock, Target announces last year that they've got 40 exclusive games, and a whole bunch of them are from the hobby game industry. That was my take on this whole thing. They finally acknowledged us, instead of us having to beg them and plead them and sign toxic contracts that would end up having companies either go bankrupt or lose money. I remember the contract Mayfair had for Eurorails and Toys R Us. It was lousy. I think he paid for that at some point. So I think that's the turning point for us. It's like 2007, 2008, somewhere in that general vicinity. Again, Barnes & Noble starts it off, Borders follows, Target's there, Walmart's sort of playing at it, but I don't know how serious they are. Catan is now in Walgreens, I found out when I walked to my local Walgreens the other day.
The Catan dice game.
The Catan dice game, yes. So I see that as the turning point.
Yeah.
You know, where the civilians, the muggles or whatever, finally realize that we exist as a people.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Hey, this stuff's pretty cool.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
You know, I'm pre-Meeples.
Yeah, I know. But you're
You had cardboard
but
Meeples,
you're
come
still
on.
engaged, I'm sure. And
But you know, I remember the early Gen Cons. We would come, and I mean early, 1974, 75, and it was these geeks who played with toy soldiers and board games. We were not mainstream.
No.
And none of us had any idea that that was going to be mainstream. We were in it because we enjoyed this particular thing. Very esoteric board games, war games. This certainly wasn't mass market.
right.
And you look at it today, and of all these things out there, Meeples or not, it's families. It's
Yeah.
parents and children, it's grandparents and grandchildren. Who would have thought? Now I think, to turn that on to Meeples, Meeples means that a grandchild can actually kind of get into this game, where he or she can't get into some of the more detailed games. And there are certainly games here that don't appeal to children. But all this stuff is family.
Yeah.
And that's the real key. Meeples are part of family. And Gen Con has turned into a family convention. And, I confess I was surprised when I realized that it would happen. Pleased,
Yeah. Yeah.
but was not what we expected from the 70s.
Right.
No, I can see that.
Right.
Games grandmas play,
Yeah.
My mother played Carcassonne, she was 65 years old when she first started playing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind for me are, like Larry said, the sort of the availability of the gateway games. The Catan, Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne type games. That really was at the beginning. I also think in that vein, Apples to Apples, which was a game that they wouldn't sell to mass market because it was the small companies that got them going and they really were in demand. The thing about Apples to Apples was there's no right answers. It's just try to, and it's more about being funny and trying to just have fun together, where it wasn't all combat and I win and you lose and all that. It was more just we had fun together. That kind of social game. I mean, I think at Milton Bradley when we did games like Categories and Taboo and Gestures and and you had Outburst and other things. That kind of laid a little groundwork. And then I actually think the Big Bang Theory is a major reason why this Gen Con is so big, is that TV show made being a geek cool.
Yeah.
For me, I was always been a geek, and I was cool in my own way, but I lived in my own world. But I think Big Bang showed us that,
you were cool in your
that
own.
we could be,
Yeah.
but we're cool too, and that we live in our own world, but we're funny and we're smart and we like to read. It's a really good thing, and where it goes, I mean, as this thing mushrooms, it's going to be great. I mean, it's getting into electronics, we're getting into 3D and virtual reality and all kinds of stuff, so it's real exciting. I wish I was younger and could experience it all again.
Hey, Chris, you want to opine on what's driven board games to kind of like?
I kind of went through it because when I published a board game, it was not a good market to be in, as we know. I think primarily, I think you just can't keep a good thing down.
Yeah.
Too long.
No, he's right.
I really believe that. So we had gone through this industry. The industry had kind of gone through contortions of D&D, which was very geeky and abstract, and then it got a little more commercial. Then we went through the Warhammer Games Workshop days. Role-playing games started diversifying into genres like vampires and subculture, and it kind of grew. But it was always very complicated and a little bit distance to it. But they were all great. But then when you came along with Magic, you kind of took that complexity and you made everything a little more accessible. The price points got more accessible, and it kind of grew and grew and grew. And then we had Pokemon as a major phenomenon in the 2000, which almost killed us, by the way. By the way, all the game shops, all I could think about was Pokemon.
That part wasn't my fault.
Didn't want to restock anything else. So he was a publisher of Pokemon during those times. And I think what happened is that Pokemon itself is a game. It's a complex game. And I think every kid in the planet had it. I don't know how many played it, but at least they had it. And guess what? They also found their way to the game store, because that's where they were in the beginning. And then we got Lord of the Rings. Ryan Dancy is an old industry colleague. He wanted to buy us, or close to buying us. I don't know if you remember back in '99. We didn't work out, but he said Lord of the Rings is too complicated. It will never be. The movie will suck because the characters are too complex, the story's too long, and it's too boring. And I bet him that it was wrong. I love Lord of the Rings. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan.
Yeah.
Then the Lord of the Rings movies came out. They were complex, big, a trilogy. It's like, oh my goodness, huge. I mean, kids were orcs and elves for the first time. My neighbors were saying, I remember a little neighbor kid running around saying, I'm from Gondor. I'm like, wow. it's like, what the hell?
Oh, that's cool.
And these products that we're making, of course, we learned through these contortions, we've learned to make them better and better and stand on the shoulders of giants. And they're great. I've never known anybody in my entire career, in my entire life, that became a gamer and then stopped being a gamer. Never. I have met gamers that stopped gaming for a while because they got married, they got kids, they whatever. But they're always was attracted to it. There was never they always come back. It's because why? Because you can't keep a good thing down. And so games ultimately, by their very nature, expose themselves to others. And so over time, I think you're building up this kind of nuclear reaction of people that have good experiences with it that never leave. And so you just are going to end up building a mountain. And the world, meanwhile, is becoming more receptive of complexity and narrative. I think that download TV, the TV stuff that's happened in the last 8-9 years have been a phenomenal thing, because all suddenly we are used to complex, long narrative storytelling. It would never happen before in the media because there would always be a standalone episode. You could never tell a long story. There were some miniseries that were fantastic, but if you missed the first one, what are you going to do? You're out of luck. Now you can download the whole series, you can go back and look at it, you can stream it, and all suddenly we have this long-form storytelling, which is building our brains for accepting more complex things. And these games are somewhat complex because you want richness out of them, and so you have to cross the bridge, the rule book bridge. Yeah. We're still trying to figure out how to cross the rule book bridge. Yeah. But people are getting more so everybody, this great, people are, even though it's complex, people are teaching each other. It's much easier to teach somebody than to read the rules. Yeah. And so slowly this is coming up, I think, and complexity and geekdom, superhero movies, Lord of the Rings, Pokemon. People are starting to be interested in science fiction, and fantasy.
I spent so much time in the 90s. We spent so much stress trying to figure out how to make Magic rules easy to learn through products and rules book. Eventually we just figured out it doesn't matter. Nobody learns that way. They teach each other.
Didn't the original game had an 84-page rule book?
I know,
Right?
arcane, dense arcane thing.
At Milton Bradley, we used to play every night after work. We'd tell our wives we were working late, but we'd just play Magic for a couple hours. And we'd call, because I knew you and I knew Richard. So if we ever had a problem or a conflict, you guys had like a hotline that was open almost all
That's true.
night.
We did.
So
We had a
we'd sit
hotline.
there at Milton Bradley and I'd just get on the phone and call and say, all right, we got this situation, what
That's
happens?
Mike
And
Ray
they'd
from
answer
Milton
it.
Bradley again.
Well, those were the days.
Oh, gosh.
So the one thing that I think is there's one technical thing which I think also helped a lot, and that's the notion of collaborative games. Back in the I think early 90s, Arkham Horror I think is one of the first ones that I can remember being an actual collaborative game. Of course, it was a
Well,
published.
Reiner had that Lord of the Rings game that was.
Yeah, and that exactly that's one of the kids. We actually published that game, and so Arkham Horror early on was collaborative, but it never was too complex and so on. It had booklets and so on. I mean, then the Reiner came out with the Lord of the Rings collaborative game, which really kind of struck a imagination of many, but they never really complete. It was a good success, but not a huge success. But I think the idea of collaborative games grew and grew when we re-released Arkham Horror in 2005. That was the biggest thing we ever did. It was huge, and everybody was getting into it. The theme, but the collaborative nature of it, the fact that you're running around spinning plates and trying to prevent gates from opening and so on was a real awakening. And so many fantastic collaborative games came in, and I think they brought in a player base of people that didn't like head-to-head, they didn't like competitive, and also they could have this experience together, like you said. And I think from a technical perspective, the idea of the collaborative game, I think, opened up a significant amount for more players. That's my view.
No,
I think it's great.
No, the collaborative game, I'm sorry, just one real quick. And also the concept of not every game has to be the last man standing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Catan, Carcassonne,
Yeah.
you play them all the way through, and then you see
Everybody
who
gets to
wins.
play the whole
Everyone
game.
gets to play the whole game.
Yeah,
Action,
yeah.
You're right.
So Eric, you have the enviable challenge here of trying to think of something they missed.
So I have two.
Oh, wow.
Only two?
Well, everything they said is like completely. I agree with 100%. So I mean, in my opinion, like any big phenomenon like a market, like there's no one answer. Right?
Sure,
It's always
sure,
a
sure.
confluence of events. I think I feel like there's two primary gateway funnels that are getting. That may not be quite as acknowledged. One is, of course, the board game cafes, which started like Snakes and Lattes in Toronto. They're all over the place, and I call them cafes 2.0 because they're not really like the Korean board game cafes of the 90s. These are board game cafes where they are built to. Yes, they're bars, but the staff is trained to teach people how to play games. They're experienced directors rather than that. And that has brought, and they're all on, their customer base is mainstream. They're not gamers. They're not pushing the same dollars around that most of us are. So they're bringing new people in. And that, of course, I mean, 10% of those turn into gamers. We're growing.
Right.
The other one that I think is maybe a little non-obvious is, that I consider is Farmville. I think the game Farmville, which I know we all have opinions on. I share those opinions, but I do truly believe that this dovetails into Chris's point about complexity. Complexity is one of the biggest barriers that board games will ever have, and we generally, when people discover how to play board games, they learn one piece at a time. Nobody learns like you don't learn D&D in a night unless you're like us. But
Yeah.
What Farmville did, which I think was super, super important, was that it took the idea of resource management and leveling, like we understand in role-playing games, basic gamification, getting experience points for for completing tasks in order. It taught that to millions and millions of people who have never been exposed to those concepts before, and now that complexity is free. I can now teach my uncle, who's like 80 years old, I can teach him how to play a basic D&D adventure game because he knows how to level up. That's crazy.
Yeah.
There's also one more
Yeah.
thing that I think is really important because you started it, and that game stores used to be stores. You walk in and buy a game and you walk out. When you came out with Magic, they started putting out tables.
Yeah.
in the stores.
Big deal.
Because why? Because you could sell packs right there. Then people, people would be doing drafts.
Yeah.
And it started something that I think is very, very important as part of that mushroom. That's the idea of a community.
Yeah.
You would go and have friends, you'd go experience things, and then soon all the game stores had gaming areas. And to this day, I feel that the idea of the community, the third place, and this is everything we do in business, evolves around the nurturing that. So despite all the cynical things that's said about businesses, we really believe that the community of stores is the wellspring of birthing a new gamer who then will birth many, many others. So
Well,
gaming space and stores.
Well, thank you. I think I have to defer some of that credit to they're a bit controversial, especially in the world of retail. But Games Workshop, they I remember I toured when we were developing this strategy and working on it. I toured Games Workshop in is it Coventry, Nottingham? Yeah, Nottingham, and met a lot of those guys, and really, they really preached like they do. They love to preach their strategy, but it was they saw their game stores as recruiting stations and places to play, and a place. They didn't use language like third place, but that's language I got. I got that word from Starbucks. Starbucks always called like that term.
Well, they invented
They invented the term.
They invented
Yeah.
the hobby experience as something a gamer gets from day one
you won,
until
Yeah.
year 3.
Yep. Exactly.
And then the
Well-
1.5 is your card.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Good job.